I knew things would change once I started at my new school. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, so moving an hour away from the city would definitely require some adjustment. I had to learn to live with it at my father's request and my mother's insistence. I stayed out of trouble. The population was, to say the least, mostly German, with a few Negroes, a few spies, a few Italians and Jews. The majority were hard-working, honest folks. The Dutchmen were a tight-knit group, but they weren't Amish or Mennonites. They were German Lutherans who dominated the neighborhood and everything in it. It was a melting pot, so I had no trouble fitting in. However, I missed my Philadelphia friends. I stayed in the neighborhood after graduation, mostly to be close to my family. I still visited the old neighborhood regularly and kept in touch with old friends. I kept in touch with old friends by going back to the neighborhood regularly. A few years later, I got my first job driving a fuel oil delivery truck. I was already working inside, dispatching and taking orders. I had an abuse for the business, and after a few years, I could already see myself owning a similar business. I was pleased to find that my social life and friendships with the opposite sex improved significantly after I married. My mother was a little disappointed that my new wife wasn't Italian, but she did her best to accommodate Marcy without reservation. After the birth of my 2 children, Marcy insisted that I get a haircut, which I was happy to do. Once the kids started school, Marcy wanted to go back to work. My father never thought a wife and mother should work. I'm not exactly sure what the rationale was, but in retrospect, I can see that it made sense. It wasn't that I minded Marcy working, but I didn't like her socializing with people she knew and grew up with. I liked some of her friends, but not all of them from high school. She took part in all kinds of student activities and loved it. I avoided those activities and the people who did them. It always seemed to me like a bunch of snobs sitting around stroking each other's egos. I knew she was sexually active before we met, but so was I. We never discussed what we did before we were together. It wasn't a rule or anything. It just happened. We'd been married for about 10 years when things started to fall apart. Marcy worked in the claims department of a local national insurance company. I became concerned when she started. After 6 months of working weekends and overtime, I knew it was time to call it quits. At a seminar, Tony said, "I just don't understand what the problem is. It's only for 3 days. I've already talked to your mom and she's agreed to stay with the kids while I'm gone. You'll be home in the evenings. I know you can cook for yourself." I was pretty surprised that she even asked that. "Who's going to this seminar?" She seemed a bit more enthusiastic when I answered. 6 girls from the department, Betty Klink from HR and Rodney. I smiled when she said his name. I was surprised that she hadn't guessed that I knew all about her special lunches and late nights. I had to work late with her boss, Rodney. Rodney and Marcy had grown up together. He was one of those kids who belonged to every club and participated in every activity except sports. "When they were in high school, do you take me for a fool, Marcy? I don't understand. What are you talking about? I've known about you and Rodney for 6 months. If you think I'm going to let you go away with him for 3 days, you're out of your mind." "Tony, what are you talking about? Rodney is my boss. There's nothing between us. I would never think of cheating on you. You know that." I looked at the empty can of Budweiser in my hand, and then I slowly got up from my chair and walked over to the kitchen. I crumpled the thin aluminum foil in my hand and threw it in the bin. I missed, but I didn't bother picking it up. The new bucket made a hissing sound as I opened the lid and sat back down. Marcy just sat there waiting for me to respond. "You are the mother of you're doing a great job as a mother. The only reason I haven't kicked you out of the house is because I've spoken to my mom and explained everything to her. She said that for the sake of the kids, I have to stay firm and hope you can handle it. If I leave you, the court will give you my children. I can't let that happen. Did you tell your mother I was cheating on you?" "No, a woman from church told her. I just didn't deny it when she asked me about it." "You're not serious. I don't believe you. Why are you saying all this?" I took a big sip of beer and smiled. "Rodney lives at 321 David Drive. It's only 3 blocks from. You go to your boss's office 3 times a week, and you stay there for almost 3 hours each time. What are you doing in his apartment for 3 hours? You can tell me about the overtime work you do in the office. Did you know that your cleaning lady at the office also goes to church?" My mom's eyes were red and her lips were quivering. "I won't do anything if you don't embarrass me or my family publicly. If that changes, I'm out of here. You can leave or stay, but you'll never take my boys away from me." She was upset as she jumped to her feet. "Damn you, Tony. I hate you. You bastard." With those words, she stormed out of the room, sobbing. It was the first time she'd ever sworn at me, and the first time she'd made a derogatory remark about my heritage. The Dutch in her had finally broken free. We had 2 boys, Terry and Rick, who shared a room with a bunk bed. The third bedroom was the room was set aside for a specific purpose, and that's where I slept from that day forward. We had a rented house with over $60. We had set aside $1,000 for a down payment on our dream house, but things didn't work out. We didn't discuss the seminar anymore. Marcy didn't work overtime anymore. She brought her lunch to work. The atmosphere at home wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. My mom wasn't getting any new feedback from her church friends. Things seemed to be normalizing, but I felt uncomfortable. There was no sex at that point, but I wouldn't put up with that situation for long. Against my better judgment, I agreed to. I went to the Christmas party with Marcy. I didn't want her to go alone, and I thought I could have a quiet evening without disturbing her. It was a good plan, but it had flaws. The company rented a room with a dance floor, a buffet, and a couple of open bars. I could drink 3 beers all evening and not feel any pain. By the time we got there, the only available tables were next to the big shots of the company. It was pretty obvious that all the employees were avoiding these places for the first hour. Everything seemed to be going well. I saw Rodney at the other end of the room chatting with his friends. A few of Marcy's colleagues asked her to dance, but Rodney stayed put. I was glad I let her dance because I didn't want to dance myself. I was just starting on my 3rd beer when I noticed Marcy and Rodney exchanging glances. It was mostly nods and head tilts, but something was definitely going on. I tried to act bored and disinterested, but I kept my eyes on them. My wife had excused herself to use the ladies' room, so I took a quick look around and noticed Rodney was gone. It was unbelievable. After we discussed it at home, I realized that it was completely stupid of her to try to meet the jerk while I was in the same building. She could see him anytime she wanted at work with no chance of being interrupted. I figured the only reason for this was to make me look like a cuckold by having an affair with Rodney in the middle of a workplace romance. When Marcy stepped into the hallway leading to the restrooms, she looked back to make sure I was still in my seat and then disappeared. I stopped at the head table, leaned over to them, and apologized for disrupting the party. The guys at the other end of the hall with the goofy grin suddenly stopped smiling. They looked worried because they didn't. I went into the women's restroom first, but it was empty. I had better luck in the men's room. Things were happening in no time. There they were, kissing. He was standing with his back to me and his hand was slipped under her skirt. There was no resistance on her part. I grabbed Rodney by the neck and took a step to the side before crashing my head into the bathroom tile. Something had definitely broken. I could hear my wife screaming my name over and over, but I was completely unaware of it. I turned Rodney around, and blood from his broken nose splattered my shirt. He was limping but still on his feet, so I gave him a good shot in the stomach. He went down and immediately started vomiting. Marcy tugged at my jacket sleeve, but I ignored her. The main hall was quiet as I dragged Rodney to the middle of the floor by his tie. I was probably choking him, but I didn't care. The orchestra had already stopped playing and everyone was watching me throw him around. I looked around the hall to see if anyone wanted to come to his aid, but there were no takers. "I'm sorry for ruining your wonderful party. I have to go now, but I'll leave my wife here for your entertainment. Drop her off at the house when you're done using her." Rodney was on his hands and knees trying to get up. His face was a bloody mess. Misty stood in the doorway with her mouth open. It was hard to tell if she was upset about what I'd done to her lover or what I just said to all her co-workers. I didn't care about the workers. I saw Rodney right under the mistletoe and couldn't resist. I kicked him in the groin so he'd remember me for a week. He fell forward and hit his face on the floor. That must have hurt, but no one said a word. I called my mom from the car and asked her to stop by and pick up the boys. They were going out of town for a few days, which seemed like a good idea. I didn't want to leave the kids with their mother. I was sure she wouldn't be able to take care of them properly. I made plans as I went along, without really knowing what I was going to do or where I was going. My boss was happy to give me a week or so off. When I arrived, my parents were already there, After paying the babysitter, I helped pack up the boys. My bag consisted of, I packed mostly socks and underwear, but I also included a few shirts and pants just in case. Before I left, I pulled a box of money out of the basement. Rafters banks paid less than 1% interest on savings accounts, so I decided to keep the money at home. I know it might seem silly to keep $62, but I had $62,000 in the house, but that was what I inherited from my mom. She had a habit of keeping big stashes all over the kitchen. I was just about to turn off the lights when a cab pulled up and dropped Marcy off. She came in and sat down on the couch without saying anything. She looked more worried than angry, and more frustrated than frightened. I told you there's only one rule: don't humiliate me or my family in public. But you just couldn't resist doing it, could you? I waited a little while for her to cry and then headed out the door. It was a little after 9. When I turned onto the Shore Expressway, I realized this party hadn't lasted very long, at least for me. I decided I'd spend a few days in Atlantic City before heading home. But first I needed to see my old friend S. He had a sandwich shop in the old neighborhood. It wasn't like the ones you see in Philly road trip movies, but it was handy for people who live nearby. His main income came from other activities that most of us either ignored or participated in. He lived on the second floor and worked in the back room. It was like old home week. After I explained my situation to him, he agreed to help me. "Tony, this is going to cost you $20. Can you handle it, or do you need me to back you up? I'll pay it forward. No problem. Do you want it dirty or quiet? Transparent. No fuss, no commotion, nothing. Do you need to go away for a few days? Have you prepared anything?" "No. I was thinking of going to Atlantic City. How about 6 days and S nights at the Taj? Are you talking about selling? I have some colleagues I think it would be very profitable for you." "Sounds good to me." "You're going alone, Tony?" "Yes. It's all happening, sort of on its own. I haven't had time to invite guests." "You don't have to be alone. You need someone to confirm you were there. Just give me a minute." He picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Carla? It's make yourself pretty and get your ass over here." A short pause followed. "No, it's nothing like that. You're going on vacation," he chuckled as he hung up the phone. "Tony, you remember Carla, my brother Michael's oldest? The chubby little girl with the dark brown eyes? I remember she was always laughing. How old is she now? I was going to cancel them on Monday morning, but I want you to use those credit cards as much as possible. You can use them for food, room service, and even some casino advances, but don't go overboard. You need to activate them to prove you were there. Spread them out over time so it doesn't feel like you're sneaking back home. It might cost you a couple $1,000, but it's cheap insurance." I knew his business. It all made sense while I was thinking it over. Carla walked in. "Tony, I haven't seen you since. You moved to the village, you look good now." I got why S was smiling. Carla was simply gorgeous. Those dark eyes were stunning, and all the baby fat she used to have seemed to have moved to her breasts. I jumped to my feet and tipped my chair over as if I were clumsy. "Tony needs someone to keep him company in Atlantic City for a few days, don't you think?" Her mood seemed to change slightly when he said that. "Aren't you married yet?" She addressed the question to me before I could answer. S stepped in. "I thought I'd chip into the conversation. I think we can safely say that the marriage is dead. Tony needs a nurse right now. I knew you always liked him, which is why I thought of you first. I'm not going to ruin anyone's family. It's not fair for you to ask me to do that. Besides, I'm not one of your prostitutes. Why don't you just get one of the girls to go with him? I don't expect you to sleep with him. I'll just keep him company and help him forget his troubles." Carla looked puzzled, as if she had just... I had a feeling she was up to something. Not only was she gorgeous, but she was also quick on her feet. "I'm sorry." She shifted her gaze from S to me and smiled slightly. "I'd love to go with you, Tony, but you have to promise to buy me saltwater taffy." We were all smiling. "It'll take me about an hour to get ready. Don't give him anything to drink. I don't want to go there with a drunk." I think I saw her wink at me as she left to get her things. S and I recounted our conversation while Carla was gone. He was very gracious and accepted my $220. I paid $0 and promised full satisfaction. The trip to Atlantic City went well, except for the fact that I had to tell Carla about the problems I was having with Marcy. Her only comment was, Oh, the poor kid's car. Carla frowned when she saw the double beds but thankfully didn't notice my slight giggle. I was sure we would only be using one of them for the rest of the week. All good things come with time. We gambled a bit, but not overly. I had enough sense to realize that I was always going to lose in the end. Carla was content with the quarter slots, and I was too. We were just looking for something to kill time. We spent more time eating and walking along the waterfront than anything else. Of course, we attended every show in town. The first night, I was the perfect gentleman, but by noon on the second day, Carla and I were already tearing up the sheets. My mum was right. I should have married an Italian woman. It felt natural, and I didn't feel like I was cheating. On the fourth day, we were getting ready for dinner when we had guests over. There were two of them, not in suits but in sports jackets. Tony Rendazzo, I'm Ray Fritz, and this is Rupert Marks, partner, Berks County Major Crimes Unit. We'd like to talk to you for a few minutes if you don't mind. Carla came out of the bathroom, her robe and panties on, looked back at the two men, walked over to the bed and picked up her robe. She looked a little embarrassed, but she knew we'd like to talk about your relationship with Rodney Foote. I didn't have a relationship with Rodney Foote, but my wife did. They felt a little awkward. Fritz was making conversation, and then he was. We're looking at Carla. We understand you spoke to him last Friday at the Continental Insurance Christmas party. Why is he pressing charges? He's disappeared. We were wondering if you could help us find him. Before we discuss this any further, I'd like someone from the Atlantic City Police Department here. I don't mean the blue suit. If you can't arrange that, I need a lawyer. My lawyer from reading my visitors didn't react in any way. Carla, get dressed. We're about to have dinner. Sorry guys, but we have reservations for 6. The stakes at Safari are pretty high. I'll probably be heading home this Friday. Would you like me to come over and chat with you then? They looked a little dumbfounded. What makes you think something happened to that underdog? Maybe he just left town for a while. I asked him and he was picked up by a cab leaving the community hospital on Sunday morning. No one has seen him since. Carla had already finished getting dressed and I was pulling on my jacket. Well, I've been here since Friday night. You can check with the hotel staff if you'd like. We're going to have a couple of steaks. Do you have any other questions? Yes, but they'll have to wait until Friday. We expect to see you then. I just nodded at them and gently guided them towards the door. We all took the elevator down together and didn't talk about anything else. Once we were in the lobby, they went to hotel security, and we went to the safari. By the time I got home, Terry and Rick were already making a big fuss over me. The saltwater taffy made everything even better. Marcy, on the other hand, was a little cold. It was clear she didn't understand what, after talking to the police, I spent the rest of the day with the boys and planned to talk to Marcy in the evening. The boys settled down for the night in front of the TV, and I sat at the kitchen table waiting for Marcy to finish cleaning up. It seemed to take her longer than usual, but I didn't back down. Finally, she turned to me and sat down, resting her elbows on the ceramic countertop. She asked me what I did to Rodney. She wasn't angry or demanding, but she seemed genuinely concerned. She looked at me when she said it, and then looked around. I've been in Atlantic City all week and haven't seen Rodney since the party. You heard him, so I hope it's true. He was in the hospital for 2 days after you broke his jaw and nose. He deserved it. She seemed to run out of questions. What were you doing with him in the... I waited a few moments in the men's room but got no answer. Why did he put his hand up your skirt? Still no answer. Marcy clenched her hands and stared at the countertop. Why aren't you at work? And then what are the kids doing home on a school day? I had to quit my job. There was no way I could go back there again. I took the boys out of school because your mom said you could be home today. It was time for a confrontation. I told you there's only one rule. You can't do anything to humiliate me or my family. It was just a simple rule. Why did you decide to ruin everything by breaking it? You two just decided you needed to do it. Marcy seemed to get more and more nervous the longer we sat there. I slammed my fist down hard on the tabletop. I said, why? God damn it, answer me. I don't know why. I don't know why it just happened that way. You were sitting in the corner like a lost puppy. We thought we could take advantage of the situation. We had no idea you'd go crazy. You were acting like a crazy person. I was scared to death at least I got some emotion out of her, but none of it made sense. I didn't even bother to analyze her words. What they'd done while I was there was stupid. They had weeks to get together before the party, and I would never know about it. The only reason they chose that time and that place was to humiliate me. All her gibberish wouldn't change that. Marcy, you have 3 choices. You can stay here and be a decent mother to your children. You can get a divorce and leave without your children. Or you can just disappear if you stay. We won't live as husband and wife, and I won't tolerate any more affairs with Rodney or anyone else. At the mention of Rodney's name, Marcy burst into tears before she could make a choice and ran out of the room sobbing. I think we'll finish this conversation tomorrow. I had to make some adjustments. I rented a small apartment a few blocks from the house. It was close enough that the boys could go there anytime they wanted. Carla moved in with me. The police talked to me about. After a few more times, they stopped bothering me. Rodney's foot was picked up by a cab outside the hospital and was never seen again. His family offered a reward for any information, but there was no response. I had dinner with Marcy and the boys every night and spent as much time as possible with my sons on weekends. It was obvious to everyone that Marcy and I were no longer a couple, although we remained married. Marcy spent a lot of time with her parents and sister, which I had no problem with. She quit her job right after the Christmas party, which seemed like a clear sign that she was seeing someone else. We never finished our conversation. When I got home, she was the perfect mother. The house was always clean, the boys were always well fed, and they had clean clothes. I took care of all the lawn and outside work. Marcy received $200 each week to pay for household expenses, food, and personal needs. I always asked her if she wanted more. But she always said no. She always said no. We didn't have credit cards at Thanksgiving and Christmas, so the boys and I were with my family. Carla usually joined us, but Marcy spent the holidays with her family. There was awkwardness whenever Terry or Rick wanted to talk about their mother and me. We both refused to discuss it with them, which I appreciated, but it was difficult for her to know what to say. This went on for years. Of course, my explanation doesn't even come close. To be honest, there were a lot of difficulties and disagreements, but we were winning. Carl and I were doing well at first, but as time went on, she started spending more time with her family in Philadelphia and less time with me. I couldn't blame her. I owed her a lot for all the efforts she had made to make the breakup easier to bear. As things stood, I couldn't divorce Marcy, and as long as the boys stayed home, I couldn't kick her out of the house. These were all self-imposed restrictions. I forced myself to stick to them, even though I hated the whole situation. I couldn't think of an alternative. The boys, on the other hand, could. Terry was 16 when things came to a head. A new student at school was a relative of my wife's former lover. He persistently pestered Terry about the situation. It was the first time such a thing had come up, and he was unprepared. Rodney's nephew ended up in the hospital, so I had to pick Terry up from school. He was expelled for 2 weeks and was facing an assault charge. Unfortunately, Rick was there when everything went wrong and wouldn't help his brother. He ended up losing 2 teeth, but earned his brother's admiration for trying to help. Marcy met us at the door. When I brought Terry's sons home, Terry immediately started criticizing his mother for not telling them about what had happened years ago. Marcy didn't get defensive. She just stood there and listened to her oldest son express his anger. I left them to it and took Rick to the dentist. Rick didn't seem too upset about his missing teeth, but I wasn't thrilled about the upcoming dental appointment. When we got home, Marcy was gone. Her car was still parked there, but that was it. Terry said she just grabbed her purse and left without saying a word to him or offering an explanation. I took a week's vacation from work to straighten things out. Marcy's parents and sister refused to even talk to me after a week. I still had no idea where she was or what she was up to. Carla and I moved into the house. We had to sleep in the same bed, which was uncomfortable at first, but the boys took it much easier than I had anticipated. One day while I was at work, everything in the house that belonged to Marcy, or was related to Marcy, disappeared. I had no idea what Carla did with it and never asked. Carla took over all the chores. I bought Marcy some credit cards to make her life easier. I even sold her car and bought a new one for Carla. Family gatherings became much less stressful. Carla was much happier, and my mother was thrilled. Terry and Rick were no longer having problems at school. My nephew Rodney never came back, and things were finally looking up, but I was still married. I waited 2 months before I went to the police and reported Marcy missing. I actually just reported her as a runaway spouse so I could use that report when I filed for divorce, using abandonment as the reason. I waited another 2 months and then filed the divorce papers. I'd planned everything in advance, so the divorce was granted after a year of Marcy being absent. Terry and Rick were fine with Carla. They just called her Carla, never Mom. We were more like a family than we'd been in years. Then, out of the blue, I made the final decision to divorce. I was a free man 2 weeks later, and Carla and I. So, we drove to Elton and tied the knot, and we were a family again. Terry graduated from high school and joined the Air Force a year later. Rick decided to go to meat cutting school in Toledo. Everything was happening so fast, and before we knew it, Carla and I were alone. We hadn't heard from Marcy, and her mom and dad moved to a college and made everyone promise to visit us at least twice a year. That was it. We kept up with our reading, and Carla and I moved back home to Philadelphia after graduation. Rick got a job at a fancy butcher store in Westchester. We saw him a few times a month and he always had something delicious to surprise us. A year later, one of Carla's nieces was getting married, so we naturally had to go to an Italian wedding in the city of brotherly love. It's a big deal. By big, we mean it's attended by a lot of people, mostly from the US looking for booze and free food. But there was plenty of everything, so it didn't matter. We were sitting with friends, enjoying the evening, when I noticed that Carla seemed a little nervous. She was looking across the dance floor as if she was staring at something. I looked around a few times but didn't see anything. I forgot about it until my wife went to the ladies' room. Something didn't seem right, so I followed her. I saw her walk to the end of the hall and meet up with one of her old friends. They chatted and posed for a bit, but it all seemed quite proper. Carla didn't go to the break room, but approached one of her personal assistants. She pointed to the table her friend had just come from. There were 3 guys and 3 girls sitting at the table. They looked like they were trying to be something they weren't. The girls were dressed a little too dressy and looked lecherous. Carla returned with a thoughtful but confident expression on her face. She said, "Tony, we have a bit of a problem. I figured it out from your going. I'd like you to explain to me why you're acting like this. You have to stay calm for a couple of minutes. One of the guys at Gina's table is going to come in here and shoot you." "What does baiting mean?" "He's going to say some insulting things about me to make you angry when you come out to fight him. The 3 of them are going to beat you up badly. What am I supposed to do? Should I let him get away with it?" "Just go along with him for now. Wait for Bobby V and the others to get into position. You might have to deal with one of them, but that'll be the worst of it." "What do you mean by play along with him?" "Just let him insult me and then agree with him. If he says I'm A, ask him how much he's willing to pay. Whatever you do, don't let him get to you." "What did all this what happened?" "I don't know. Look at Gina's table. See the woman with the short platinum hair? Look closely. Oh, that's Marcy. What's Marcy doing here?" "Marcy's boyfriend is somehow involved with the fiancé. It looks like she's still angry at you and set him up to clean your clothes when she realized you were." "Right. It looks like she's looking for payback while you and Sal are taking care of business. I'll talk to Marcy in the ladies' room. It's not going to be pretty. I didn't like the way things were going. This was a wedding, and the young bride would remember this evening for the rest of her life. It wouldn't be fair for a couple of people to ruin it for her. I was annoyed to see that some thugs had ruined it for her. 10 minutes later, I noticed the guy who was with Marcy get up from his chair. I stood up and apologized to everyone at the table. Carla threw me a strange look, but seemed to understand. I nonchalantly walked over to the side fire exit where everyone went out to smoke. The guy made a gesture with his head. The other 2 guys got up to follow him, but they didn't notice that 3 guys with Louisville sluggers were coming from the back of the bar. 6 guys were smoking by the fire exit when I told them to get out. They left without any protest. There was a sense of urgency in my voice. I walked about 20 steps from the door, stopped and turned around. They walked out, smiling, but it didn't last long. A few seconds later, they heard the door close behind them. When they turned around and saw 3 guys with bats and the father of the bride, they stopped smiling. It was over in less than 30 seconds. I didn't raise my hand. "I'm sorry for any trouble I caused you or your family on this special evening. I felt like a character from The Godfather. Thanks for having the decency to take it outside." He shook my hand and turned back to his daughter. I thanked his guys for their help and went to find Carla. They stayed behind too. I thought it was time to leave. Carla wasn't around, and the table where Marcy was sitting was empty. Rick was there with a few of his friends and had heard about the commotion. He found me at the bar getting a fresh drink. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" My first impulse was to stay quiet, but I couldn't. "I learned that your mother was here with her new boyfriend. That's all I need to know." He smiled, turned to the bartender, and asked for a beer. We sat and talked about other things for about an hour. Finally, Carla showed up looking a little disheveled. She gave me a sly smile. "Gina and I had to take your ex. My wife was taken to the hospital because she wasn't feeling well." Rick and I couldn't stop laughing. "Tony, can we go home now?" It was a long night, but a lot of fun. We never saw Marcy again. Carla and I are still together in the old neighborhood. Life is great.